So there is a lot going on here. I mean, I swear, somehow stimulus has more drama attached to it than like the Kardashians do. I don't know how, but it happens. So I just wanted to take some time to really dig into the facts on a realistic timeline for the next stimulus check, the third stimulus check, if you will, and the next stimulus bill actually passing, and when you can expect to receive some benefit from it. Now, I know you guys like the short and quick updates, but this one's a little bit more involved and for good reason, I promise. So we're going to break down the most recent updates here, where negotiation power lies right now. I think this is really interesting. The proposals that we're looking at, there's actually kind of three stimulus proposals right now when you really look at the details of these things. And then we're going to piece that all together into a coherent and more realistic timeline. We've been hearing lots of things like, expect a stimulus bill passed this week. Let's be a little bit more realistic here and non-sensational. You know, we're not clickbaiting around here. We're just getting a realistic idea of what exactly is going on. So starting with negotiations and the power dynamic. You might not know this, but Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer have been fighting back and forth for the last week or so about filibusters. And until this filibuster issue was solved, we weren't going to get really any stimulus negotiations out of the way. Think of it like setting up a board game and then determining the rules for that board game you're about to play before you start playing. That's what they needed to do. And now negotiations can really get started. McConnell was pressing the new Senate Majority Leader Schumer to preserve filibusters, leaving Republicans the chance to either delay or block bills unless they hit 60 votes in the Senate. Of course, McConnell would want this because it gives him a little bit more power and the Republicans a little bit more power. Schumer didn't want to do this, and what ended up happening was a couple Democrats came forward and said they don't want filibusters to go away, and McConnell let off the gas and said, okay, if they're not going to let this happen, then the math just doesn't work out and you're not going to be able to take these away from the Republicans right now. So after a ton of back and forth arguments for the last week or so, nothing was really solved between Schumer and McConnell. There wasn't like really a negotiation. Some outside circumstances just decided how it was going to end up. And somehow after this, both of them kind of declared themselves the winner of the fight. Unsurprisingly, of course, it has to be just a little bit ridiculous. But now negotiations can really begin. So let's talk about the proposals that we're looking at right now. First, we have Biden's $1.9 trillion proposal. This is the one that we're most familiar with. Includes the $1,400 stimulus check, the top-up stimulus check up to $2,000. The unemployment boost of $400 per week through the end of September, go from mid-March to the end of September. $350 billion to state and local governments. The increase of minimum wage from, I think, $7.25 to $15 an hour. Increased food stamps. Tons of funding for vaccines. I mean, this is a huge comprehensive bill that covers a ton of areas, but that's the bulk of the areas. And then we have Senator Susan Collins, who's crafting the Plan B bill. This is a bill we talked a little bit about the other day, and a lot of you were actually all for this bill, frankly, because it makes a lot of sense. The idea for this bill is a very pared down bill only to the $1,400 stimulus checks. Now, we don't know all the details here. We don't know if it would be adult dependents. We don't know if the income limits would be changed, like we heard Biden talking a little bit about. He was saying that he is open to lowering the income limits. And I was actually surprised. A ton of you are all for lowering the income limits. I mean, it makes sense. On average, the people with the lower income are going to be more in need. I do see the other side, though, where income is only one factor of the equation, and someone could have a higher income and really be struggling right now, especially when it's based off of your income last year. A lot of times, a lot of things can change in a year. So I see both sides of this. Make up your own opinion on that one. So the pared down bill would just have the stimulus checks and funding for vaccines. So we can expect probably a couple $100 billion in funding for vaccines. So the total cost of this bill would be under $500 billion, give or take, $100 or so billion, depending on the scope of all the programs. But this bill would be much easier to pass through both moderate Democrats and Republicans because it's small, it's targeted, it's more focused, and frankly, there's just fewer things to argue on it. Now, we don't have an actual bill text for this yet. They're waiting on more data to finish up the proposal. They requested some data, now they're requesting some more. They're looking at how much in approved stimulus funding has actually been spent. So in the last year or so, there's been about $4 billion in approved stimulus spending, and at least $1.8 trillion of that has yet to even be spent. So if we think back about like 7 months ago, the Main Street Lending Program was this huge program for mid-sized businesses and almost didn't get utilized at all. And so there's a couple $100 billion sitting with that. The Paycheck Protection Round 2 funding had a ton of funding left, I think like $130 billion left, and then just various other programs that weren't utilized to the full extent. And they're saying at least $1.8 trillion is just sitting there. So you're probably thinking, why can't we just take that $1.8 trillion and plow it into another stimulus bill and there's no more deficit? And that'd be a great question. Why don't they do that? So we might see something within this Plan B proposal that does something like that with the unused funds and just repurposes them. Seems like a win-win-win situation. And then we have Bernie Sanders, who is working on a budget package that's very similar to Biden's proposal. He's expanding this budget package to include things like the $15 an hour wage increase. So we have tons of options, which is of course good to have different things to choose from. But to me, it seems unorganized. Democrats are just kind of all over the place with these different proposals. Biden says he's open to other ideas. Schumer says he's open to other ideas. His time frame as to when things could be passed is kind of wishy-washy. I just think this unorganization is going to very likely cause some delays in when we actually see a bill pass. After looking at all this, I get the idea that Democrats are threatening budget reconciliation, so they can pass a bill with just a 51-vote majority in the Senate. But it seems like they really don't want to use that unless it's their absolute last resort. And we have to remember that these people have many more years to work with the other side. So I think they just, if at all possible, are trying not to get on the bad side of the people who may be in power 4 years from now. In fact, McConnell basically said that if they just go ahead and pass whatever they want when they have control of the House and the Senate and the White House, and if they do so with force, they're going to come to regret it once Republicans have control again. Now, is he just saying that to cause fewer problems for his party? It's really hard to tell. And are they going to have control in 2 years or 4 years? That's also hard to tell. So we just don't know how seriously they're going to take those kinds of threats. But what needs to happen most definitely is more outreach to Republicans to see what actually could be agreed on right now. Something bipartisan is always best as long as it still is helping the people who are in need, or at least there's a consensus to do the greatest good with their legislation. I notice a reoccurring theme that many Republicans have said that they've received little to no communication from the White House and from Biden, and they have serious issues with current proposals. And it seems that these issues could likely be worked out, to some extent. I think there's certain issues within, especially Biden's proposal, that a lot of Republicans are going to say, no way, not going to work. But there's definitely got to be some wiggle room, especially with the threat of a bill just potentially being forced through with nothing they want in it, or way too much of things that they don't want in it. So here's what I believe will happen realistically. The logical choice, of course, would be to go with the Plan B plan, the one that has the $1,400 checks and the vaccine funding, because it's going to be hard to find people who are very against that bill. The only real argument would be that the stimulus checks aren't targeted enough, and that could be altered to vary the income limits or somehow make it more targeted and get that through very swiftly. I imagine if that was a bill right now in Congress, it could probably be passed in the next 6 to 9 days. It wouldn't take much. It'd be a pretty simple bill, especially relative to these massive comprehensive bills that we've seen passed. So that would be the logical choice. But is the logical choice actually going to happen? I don't see that happening. What will more likely happen is negotiations on a larger comprehensive bill that allows wiggle room to fit in these weird kind of specialized interests and funding for this, that, and the other that doesn't really make sense. Legislators like making these massive comprehensive bills that are hard to understand and allows them to do, frankly, more of what they want to do. So I think we're going to see about a month and a half of debate that leads to about a $1 trillion bill passed in early to mid-March. And here's why. I kind of have 3 reasons that I came up with this hypothesis. First, they're unorganized. There needs to be more firm proposals before anything gets truly negotiated on. We don't have a vote scheduled in the House or the Senate, so it's not going to happen anytime within a few days. It's just too wishy-washy right now. We need set proposals that have negotiations back and forth and closed-door meetings on the nitty-gritty details, and we just don't have that yet. Second, they're just vying for too many things that are hard sells, in my opinion, on the Republican side, and this will take time to find resolutions. I mean, just things like state and local government funding, we know so many Republicans don't want anything to do with this. The minimum wage increase, this is something that Democrats have been fighting for forever and Republicans have been fighting against forever. And that's not going to be an easy fight just because it happens to be in a stimulus bill. So there's got to be some back and forth, some give and take here. And frankly, I don't know what Republicans would take in exchange for a massive minimum wage increase. I mean, only time can tell what exactly happens on those more minute details. But we know for sure that if there is negotiations, there's going to be a lot of negotiations. And then third, and probably most importantly, deadlines. Current unemployment boosts expire March 14th. This is a safety net. You can think of it no different than a college kid who has 3 weeks to write a paper. So of course he finishes that paper on midnight, the night that the paper is due. Congress has done this several times this year alone, and there's no reason to expect them not to go right up to the edge of the deadline again. Unemployment boosts, they will absolutely want to continue come mid-March. But I just know there's so many of them that are like, okay, we have this window of time where it's kind of smooth sailing until we get, a week, 2 weeks out from this unemployment boost expiration date. Now, if that were to happen, a bill passed the week before the unemployment boost expired, we would see the first stimulus checks received sometime around the 25th of March. So, I mean, it's not that long from now, but it's not tomorrow either, like some of these headlines and some of the clickbait wants us to think, like checks tomorrow, ? No, checks aren't going to be tomorrow, but they very likely will happen. It's just what's the most realistic timeline, and March seems to be that as of right now. And this is, of course, considering just everything that we have publicly available right now. Some major news could come out tomorrow and a lot could change, but this seems to be the fair assessment for present day. So that's all we have for today. Use the link in my description for Webull where you can get 4 free stocks. I know tons of you have successfully used that link and received your free stocks, and it's a pretty awesome deal. So I'd just like to thank you for watching as well, and I hope you have a profitable day.